Welcome back to another episode of Top Quad, guys. As you can see behind me, I've got just about all of the motor parts for the KFX right behind me, and behind you guys, there's a couple more parts. We've got the engine cases back there and stuff. So I'm pretty much gonna jump right into it. We're gonna do a full assembly video on the KFX450R. Now, I wasn't planning to do this initially, but I get so many comments and requests to do a 450 motor full assembly. So that's what we're gonna do. I didn't break this motor down. Keep in mind, this was a basket case, so it's probably gonna take me like 4.5 hours to do, but the video should only be, I would say, for the entire motor, I'm gonna guess this video is gonna be 45 minutes to an hour long. But yeah, I will have every single step will be in here, all of the torque specs and whatnot. So it'll be a complete video. Now, just remember, I haven't done a KFX before, so bear with me. But this should be a pretty inclusive guide on how to assemble the motor. We will be going by the factory service manual, so everything should be to spec. Now, just in case you're new to the channel, my name is Mike Sabo. I do builds on quads and dirt bikes. I am not a professional technician, but I do know my shit when it comes to motors. So just keep that in mind when it comes to the information. So enjoy the video, guys, and let's get to it. Okay, guys, so throughout the video in this top corner right here, I will have the section of the factory Kawasaki service manual that we will be working on. So if you are servicing your quad and you want to follow along in your manual, you'll know exactly where to go. There will also be chapters listed in the description and pinned in the top comment of this video. So if you don't need to watch this entire video or you want to go to a specific spot, you'll be able to go right there with a click of a button. And one last thing, guys, don't forget to comment below and let me know what you think of this video and how I can improve in the future. That helps me out big time. And remember to hit that thumbs up button. Okay, guys, enjoy the video. All right, guys, so check it out. We do have our two case halves here. These are brand new case halves right from Kawasaki. If you guys were following the series, you saw the cases were shot, at least this side was. Anyway, the chain had popped off, busted away, this portion of the case, and there were other pieces that were broken as well. So these are brand new cases, and I went ahead and cheated a little bit, guys, and I did put the bearings in already. I used the oven and freezer method, so we put these cases in the oven at 230 degrees, and then I left the bearings in the freezer for probably about 3 days. That makes putting the bearings in a breeze. I also popped our seals in, and you can see there is a clip, a circlip in here for the output shaft seal. And one other thing I put in was the shift shaft stopper, which is this little shaft right here. That just gets tapped in place. So we're gonna start with the right side case half. I'm gonna flip this over, and it will sit slightly uneven due to that shift shaft stopper that's sticking out, but that's really no problem. So I'm just gonna kind of slide this in place for you guys. I'm gonna try to make the best visuals for you guys so everything's easy to see. And you can see how nice and clean these cases are, man. All nice and surfaced and everything, right from Kawasaki. That is freaking awesome. I've already put assembly lube on our bearings, and you can see our crank bearing came brand new with assembly lube already on it, that blue grease in there. All right, now I've propped up our case half on these 2x4s, so this is gonna make it really easy for dropping the transmission shafts in. Otherwise, they're gonna be hitting the bench, and also for the crankshaft. So that's the first thing we're gonna do. We're gonna put in our transmission. Now, also for you guys following the series, our 5th gear was shot. So I've already gone ahead and replaced 5th gear, which I believe is this one right here. So I got a brand new gear right from Kawasaki on there, and we're gonna go ahead and put these things in place. We're gonna face them this way. So we're just gonna drop these in place. We wanna make sure they're correctly oriented. Put the bigger one in first, and we'll see. I'm actually probably gonna have to mesh these together. There we go. I'm gonna apply assembly lube to these gears and just kind of spin them around and get them lubed up. We don't want to start the engine dry. All right, now we'll drop our crankshaft in. I've already gone ahead and hit it with some assembly lube, and we're gonna put this in. It should slide right in place. We're putting this in with the keyed and tapered shaft facing upwards. Now we're gonna put our shift drum in place, and we're gonna do it facing this way, and I'm putting assembly lube on pretty much everything. Best thing you want to do is put this stuff together dry. All right, now we've got two different style of shift forks. One of them says 3 on it, and the other one says 035. You can see there's 2 of them that say 035. The 2 035s are going to go on the output shaft, and then this is going to go on the drive shaft. I'm going to put a little bit of lube on the fingers of these forks, and you'll see the area where these forks fit into. It's pretty obvious. Put a little bit of lube on this pin, and we'll slide this in place. All right, now we're gonna do the same with these shift forks. Just wanna make sure that this little pin is facing towards the drum. Same thing with the longer pin. All right, now we'll spin this around, get all that assembly lube all over everything. There's also a rubber tube I forgot to put in here. Just want to make sure that that is in place. All right, now I spun this around so you guys can see. We've got a little dowel pin with an O-ring that goes right here. Put a little bit of assembly lube on there. Press that in place. And then we've got this oil tube. Put a little bit of lube on both ends. And this just presses into place. Now we've got two dowel pins. There's one that goes back here and there's one that goes up here. You might not be able to see this one, but they're two solid dowel pins. I'm gonna put a little bit of anti-seize on these so that they come out easily, because these were a bitch to remove. And this is kind of just good practice to have anyways with dowel pins. It just makes it that much easier when it comes time to do the motor again. All right, so for now we're done with the right case half. We got the left case half here. Have it propped up on wood so you can kind of see what's going on here. Again, we have all the bearings installed already. So the first thing that we're gonna do is put in our idle gear shaft, and there's a pin that goes through that as well. So the pin goes through like this. Put a little bit of lube on here, and then it goes right in here. Now next we have a washer, a needle bearing, which I'm gonna grease up. Then our reverse gear goes on. And then another washer. Now we have a small dowel pin. It's gonna go right here. And then once you've got that pin in there, we have our reverse gear retainer. This will pop right on top of the gear. Then we've got 3 bolts. Got a little bit of blue Loctite on these. And these get torqued down to about 11 foot-pounds.
Got the case in the vise here so it doesn't spin on me.
All right, now we're actually ready to assemble the case halves. So according to the manual, Kawasaki wants you to use Kawasaki bond. And they want you to put it on this left case half, all on the mating surfaces. Now I'm gonna use Yamabond 6B because everybody knows I love Yamabond. I use this stuff pretty much on all my crankcases and it works great. So you could use Honda bond, Yamaha bond, you could use Kawasaki bond also. They're all gonna work just fine. You just wanna make sure that you use a good one. So we're just gonna put a nice little film around the edges, and you wanna make sure all of your surfaces are nice and clean. And I actually went around my entire case and cleaned all the mating surfaces with lacquer thinner. You don't want any oils or anything on there, anything that's gonna inhibit the gasket sealer from doing its job. And I just kind of like to dab my finger here. It makes this little barrier of case sealer kind of stand up, makes it a little bit thicker. I think that works better.
Now you guys with a sharp eye may notice that something's missing here that we've already previously installed. So if you look at the reverse gear, the retainer is not there. Now that's because I put this engine together and then at about 3:30 a.m. I realized that I forgot to put that retainer on. So I had to split the cases, pull it all apart and put that retainer in and then put everything back together. But that's why you don't see it right here.
All right, now we're gonna flip our case half over here. I'm just gonna try to line everything up. And there is this little kind of inspection window thing here so you can spin the reverse gear. All right, now I believe I have 13 crankcase bolts for this half. So you want to put all these in, and you do want to put a little bit of anti-seize on all of these. Now I'm running these in with a Milwaukee Impact. This has torque settings, and on one, it's barely anything at all. This just kind of speeds up the process, and then we'll torque them after they're all run down. And it's a good idea to go in a crisscross pattern. as you're tightening these. And now we're going to torque all these down to 8 foot-pounds. And now that our cases are all tightened down, now is the time to go around and wipe away any gasket sealer. I like to use a little bit of lacquer thinner. That'll wipe it right away. Right now we're going to move to the right engine side. This is the clutch side. So the first thing we're going to start with is the shift detent. So there is a little stud that goes right here. This little threaded stud. The shorter portion sticks outward. It's rounded as well, whereas this side is not. So I'm just going to thread this in by hand. Whoops. All right. Now we have our spring. We've got the catch on the left side. Put that in place. And we have our collar. And here is our detent with the roller bearing. I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube on there. And then you can see the little cutout here. That's a catch for the spring. So I'll put it on in the correct orientation. We've got a little washer and then a 10mm nut. Now the manual says 78 inch-pounds. I'm going to go to 8 foot-pounds, which is pretty close. It's a little bit more. Then we have our shift cam. It's like the shift star. You see there's a little cutout right here. That's going to go right on this pin. Now to hold back this shift detent, we'll use a flathead. Then we have our shift cam bolt right here. I'm going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on it. And this gets tightened down to 21 foot-pounds. You just kind of roll this until it stops. At this point, you want to check and see if your transmission is rolling smoothly. It's a lot easier if you take the tension off of the shift detent. Just make sure it moves nice and easy. And then we want to leave it in neutral. And you can tell if you're in neutral by looking at the shift star in the back. You can see there's a pointy. The one that the shift detent in is actually recessed. It's the only one like that. And you can test it by holding your drive shaft and your output shaft and making sure that they can spin free of one another. All right, now we're going to hop around the other side because I want to do this in the order that the Kawasaki manual has it. And we're going to replace the O-ring on the countershaft. So I used a pick to kind of reach in there. You don't want to damage your seal. Probably should take this off before. I didn't realize that I was going to be replacing this. All right, now we'll put our new O-ring on. I already put a little bit of lube on it. All right. Now we're going to put our collar in. I'm putting a little bit of oil on the outside. And you'll see there's 2 little oil grooves. Those go facing inward. All right, there we go. All right, now we'll install the balancer drive gear. You'll notice in the spleens there's one tooth that's missing right here. That matches up with the crank right here. So just slide that in place and the collar goes facing inwards. And then there's a circlip that goes on here to retain this. The manual does recommend that you use a new circlip. All right, now we're going to do our lubrication system. We've got an oil screen that goes on both sides. These things were super, super dirty and sludged up. There was definitely an oil blockage. Actually, we found an oil blockage. The broken gear tooth was stuffed up in there. So what I'm going to do, I've already cleaned these screens out, obviously. Just going to put a little bit of lube on them. We're going to slide this in place. All right, now we've got a little dowel pin. It goes right here. Then we've got our outer rotor and our inner rotor for the oil lubrication system. We're going to put a little lube on both. And there is a dot on the one face. We're going to face that outward. It doesn't say that in the manual, but it looks like that's the way it is in the pictures. Then we have our inner rotor. There's a little dowel pin that goes in here. You can see it fits in like so, and then we'll put this in place. All right, now we'll put our oil pump cover on. Don't force it. You got 3 shorter bolts, and then one long bolt. And our lower cam chain guide is going to bolt on right here. So I'm going to go ahead and throw our cam chain on. I'll just kind of throw this over the front for now. And this goes in place like so. Just going to run these in on the lowest setting. I'm going to tighten these down to 8 foot-pounds. All right, now we're going to do the other side. Same thing, we got one of these oil screens. Just oil up the lips. Now we've got 2 dowel pins, one right here and one right here. We've got our outer rotor and our inner rotor. It's going to go with this portion facing inward with the splines outward. That will fit in place. You might have to spin it to get it to line up. There it goes. That joins with the other side. Now I'll put our cover on. Just like with the other side, don't force it. It will pop into place. And again, we will tighten these to 8 foot-pounds, starting from the middle, working our way out. Now we have this little assembly that slides in here. You see there's a little cup, a spring, and a little washer with a collar on it. So I'm going to put a little bit of lube on this and we'll slide it in place. And then we've got a little clip that holds this in place. All right, now we've got a little shaft that goes right here. Put a little lube on there. We have our oil pump idler gear that goes right on top with the step side facing outwards. And we've got a little washer, goes right on top. And then we have the oil pump driven gear, which goes on the spleens, make sure everything lines up. And there's a little C-clip that we're gonna put on there. Now from the factory, there's a little retaining clip that goes on here. I'm gonna use an E-clip because I don't have one of the regular style clips on hand, but the E-clip will work just fine, so you could really use either. All right, now we've got this oil pipe that goes right above our drive shaft. There are 1, 2, 3 ports, and there's little O-rings on the back of this. So just put a little bit of oil on these. If they're bad, you definitely want to replace those, and it literally just pops right into place. Then we've got an 8mm bolt that will get tightened down to 8 foot-pounds. All right, now we'll put our oil pump drive gear in place. Goes right on your crankshaft. It's really tight tolerances. There we go. Match it up right here. And then we have our primary drive gear. You want to go with the spacer facing inward. Just get that in place like so. And then we have a washer and a nut, and this is reverse threads, I believe. So if you go in to the left, it's going to tighten it down. Now I am going to use a little bit of Loctite on this. For now, I'm just going to put it on there, and then because we can't tighten that down until we can hold this gear in place, which we'll do when we have the clutch basket on. All right, now we're going to put our shift ratchet assembly in. This is our plate that holds everything in position. Here is the ratcheting assembly with our shift pawls. If you pull this apart, there are little springs in here that give resistance to the ratcheting mechanism, and it just kind of fits together in here, goes in this orientation, and we'll put this in the shift star. I call it the shift star anyway. There we go. We've got a regular bolt in the top and a flathead goes in the bottom, and for whatever reason in the manual they want you to tighten the bottom one first, and they want you to use a non-permanent Loctite on the bottom. So I put a little bit of blue Loctite on both of them, but they specifically do say that you should put blue Loctite on this bottom flathead bolt. So we'll do like the manual says, and we will tighten the bottom bolt first. These are both going to go to 8 foot-pounds. Put a little assembly lube in here. We've got a little collar that goes right on this peg here. Now I'll put our shift shaft in place. You should put a little bit of oil on here before you put it in. And I've already gone ahead and polished this thing so we have the smoothest operation that we can. All right, now we're gonna put our counterbalancer in. It goes in from the right side. Now I'm gonna spin you around here. And from this side, we're gonna put this gear on, and you'll notice there is a punch mark here and a punch mark here. So this punch mark is pointing out that one of these splines is a bit more shallow. You guys can probably see that. So that's gonna match up with this one spline on here that's shallow. It can't fit unless you put it on the right way. The stepped portion faces the back. So we'll slide this in place. And then you'll notice on the crank gear, there's a little punch mark right here. So we want to line that up with this punch mark. Just like that. Then we're going to put our balancer weight on, and the part with the little cutout goes facing outward. See, the other side is flush. And there is a punch mark here that you want to line up with the punch mark here. Again, this can only, I mean, you could put it on this way, but it can only go one way once you have it facing the direct, or the correct orientation. So you can't really mess it up. Put a little bit of blue Loctite on here, and we'll spin our nut on. And using the good old soft aluminum nail technique, that will hold that gear in place. And we're going to tighten this counterbalance gear to 38 foot-pounds. All right, we're getting ready to put our clutch on here. This area up here may seem a little vacant to you, but that's because this is where a Kickstarter would go. So from the factory, the KX450F does not come with a Kickstarter. I do believe they make an aftermarket kit, or used to anyways. And I've also got my dowel pins in place. There's 2 of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit of assembly lube on our gear and a little bit on our drive shaft. And I've already gone ahead. You can see these fingers are nice and clean, nice and smooth. They were all grooved out. That's a little bit of wax, but they were all grooved out from the clutch plates. Smoothed them all out, so they should be good to go now. Then we have a toothed washer that goes in place here. And then we have our inner clutch hub. Same thing with this. All of these were grooved out really bad. So I cleaned them all up, smoothed them all out. Ideally, you should replace this. But for the Top Quad Challenge that this is being used for, we had a $3,000 budget, so I tried to save everywhere that we could. Then a washer goes in place, and you can see it actually says outside on it. So that is the side you want facing outward, obviously. I'm going to put just a little bit of blue Loctite on here. Spin our nut on. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and pack our clutch. So we're gonna be using a Tusk competition clutch kit, but this is probably one of the most affordable clutch kits you can get that isn't a total knockoff. Tusk is pretty solid. There are some clutch kits on eBay that are just super cheap, and I do not recommend those. I've thrown them in stock quads and they still slipped like immediately. So Tusk is a pretty solid choice. So you'll see here, we didn't get springs with this kit. It's just the friction plates and our regular steels. You can see they're dimpled, and you got a sharp edge and a rounded edge. You want to make sure that they're all faced in the same orientation. It doesn't really matter if they're facing outward or inward, just like to keep those in the same orientation. And you'll notice here we've got a couple different types of plates. So this actually isn't a Tusk plate. I'll get to that in a second. Here is the kit right from from Tusk, and you'll notice this top disc is a little skinnier than the other ones. And that's because this is used with what's called a judder spring. If you look in the manual, they don't say judder spring, but what that is, if you've ever rebuilt your clutch from OEM or had like an OEM style clutch, you'll notice there's these metal rings in here that go inside the one ring, which is the small ring, and that's supposed to make the clutch a little bit smoother and kind of have a better feel, but it's not really good for performance. The way I see it is the clutch is only as strong as its weakest link, and the thinnest one usually starts slipping before any of the other plates. So what a lot of guys do is they just get rid of this and they put it's called the full fiber mod. At least that's what they call it in the Raptor world. So what I did is I went ahead and I got a Kawasaki OEM plate or a friction disc, and we're just going to throw that in place of this one, and we're just going to get rid of the judder springs entirely. I'd show you the judder springs, but I accidentally tossed them out with the old clutch pack because I wasn't planning on using them. But that's why we have one weird or oddly colored disc. That's going to be the last one to go in. So what we're going to do is we got this paper plate here. We're going to throw some oil on them, just a little bit to get them soaking. It's good to get your fibers soaking with oil so you don't have any issues, premature wear, or clutch seizure. So pretty simple. I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll go ahead and put them in the clutch basket. All right, so we'll just put a little bit of oil on here, and we'll just kind of spread it around on all of the clutch plates. Now, if you're using a Kawasaki manual, you will see that there's actually 3 different types of clutch plates that they use OEM. Now, if you're going to use an aftermarket kit, I think they kind of rule all that stuff out, and they only use one style. It kind of makes it confusing when you have 3 different styles. You know, one of the styles is the little skinny one, and then you have these ones, which, well, they're not these ones, but they're the OEM ones. This one, and then there's one other style. But like I said, when you go to the aftermarket, you're probably going to have the same style discs and frictions across the board, which really makes things a lot easier. All right, now we're going to go ahead and start loading up our clutch pack. Going to start with a fiber and end with a fiber. So we will just slide these things in here. Next, we will put a plate. And like I said, there's a sharp edge and a rounded edge. I like to keep them all in the face in the same orientation. I'm going to put the sharp edge outward for this one. I also like to stagger these little divots. Not really sure that does anything, but it does make it at least look a little cleaner. And finally, there is our Kawasaki plate. Now this bolt gets torqued to 72 foot-pounds. If you have a clutch holding tool, you can do it that way with a torque wrench. I like to just hold these things in place. Once you get the plates in there, you can usually get a nice tight grip on this thing, and the plates will hold your inner hub from spinning, and then you can kind of just snap it on with an impact. So that should be plenty tight. Gonna push our clutch actuator in place. And now we'll put our clutch push rod in. I'm gonna put a little bit of assembly lube on here. This goes in like so, just pushes right in. Then we'll put the push rod holder in place. Got our pancake bearing, put a little bit of grease on there. And then we have a washer that goes on top. Get that greased up real nice. Now we can put our pressure plate on. Make sure it's sitting nice and flush. And I'm going to be using my OEM springs. Nothing crazy here. I'm going to run in our bolts with an impact, but I'm not going to tighten it with the impact. This just makes it really quick and easy, and then we'll torque it once everything's in place. And I'm going to torque these to 7 foot-pounds. All right, now using the old aluminum nail trick, we are going to tighten our primary drive gear. This also goes to 72 foot-pounds. And keep in mind, guys, this is a left-hand thread. So we actually are going to the left to tighten this thing down. So I will put my Milwaukee on reverse. And that should be good and tight. Throw a new gasket on. I'm not going to use any gasket sealer this time. I usually use a sealer, but we're not going to do that Kind of set the gasket on the dowel pins.
And you'll notice there's a small O-ring here. You want to make sure that's lubricated and in place before you put your engine cover on.
You can see we have our surface area nice and clean, no old gasket material on there. And we're going to put this in place. You might have to spin the water pump to get it to line up with your counterbalancer. All right, now I'm just going to start running these in nice and gentle.
Now, sometimes these covers can be a little bit difficult to get on, and not just on a KFX450R. And you'll see here, I'm using a rubber mallet to slightly tap around the edges of the case, and I'm putting the bolts in and just very gently pulling down in opposite locations, kind of going in a crisscross pattern. I'm not tapping hard with the mallet. If you have to tap really hard, there's something that's probably wrong, but sometimes these are a really tight fit. So just take your time. If it's not looking right, pull the cover off and then redo it. It'll go on there as long as you have everything right.
Now I'm going to tighten these down to 8 foot-pounds, going in a crisscross pattern. Now we'll put on our clutch cover. We got 2 dowel pins, one that goes right here, and then one that goes down here. Put a fresh gasket in place, hang it on the dowels, and again, all of our surfaces are nice and clean. Put the clutch cover on. We've got 2 long bolts that go up top. And we've got bolts that go around the bottom. Same thing here. We're going to go to 8 foot-pounds, go in a crisscross pattern. All right, now we'll put our water pump impeller on. It kind of just presses in place. And we have a bolt that goes in there. We'll put a little bit of blue Loctite on here. I'm going to throw a pipe through here so that we can tighten this down. We're going to go to 9 foot-pounds. Now we're going to put our water pump cover on. We've got 2 dowel pins. There's one right there and another one right here. We'll hang a new gasket on here and we'll put our cover in place. Go to 9 foot-pounds. All right, now we're going to put our clutch side oil filter on. We've got 2 little bolts that go in here. Torque those to 9 foot-pounds. Now we've got a small spring that goes in. And we've got our new oil filter. We'll put a little bit of lube on the O-ring. I'm taking a little bit of motor oil and lubing up the O-rings for our cover. Now I'll take our new oil filter and press this in place. And now we'll push this in place. And I'm just going to kind of gently work this in. You don't want to pinch the O-ring because it will tear. Tighten this to 9 foot-pounds. All right, guys, now we're going to move to the top and we're going to put our starter on. So I put a new O-ring on here, clean the motor up. You want to make sure that these 2 mounting points are nice and clean where it's grounded. So first thing I want to do is put a little dielectric, any kind of lubricant on the O-ring just to help it seal. And this will just slide right into place. Just like with any O-rings, you kind of want to go easy with that and make sure that you don't chop your O-ring because it will shear off if you just stuff it in there. You got to make sure that it fits in. I'm going to go to 9 foot-pounds with these. All right, let's get together our stator side. So first thing I want to put in place is our cam chain slide. That's going to go right in here. I'm going to throw a little bit of blue Loctite on here. And this will go in place like so. And this I'm just going to snug up. Should move freely. Now we've got our starter gear here. I've already put some lubricant on it. I've also put some lubricant on our crankshaft. You want to test it out and make sure it works. It should only rotate one way. You'll see rotates freely this way, and then it locks. If it doesn't lock, you got to replace that. It's a bearing in the back. It's a one-way bearing. So we're going to slide this gear in place. And then you can see we have a key on our crankshaft. You just want to line that up with the hub right here, or flywheel, whatever you want to call it. That just slides right in place. Then we have our flywheel nut. This is going to go right here at 72 foot-pounds. Put a little bit of blue Loctite on here and spin that in place. Now I'm not going to torque this. I'm going to use the impact. But like I said, if you did want to torque it, it goes to 72 foot-pounds. That should be good. Now we've got our starter idler gear. You can see I've got it lubricated, both sides. The side with the trench goes facing inward. Just gonna go just like that. Now I've actually already put this cover on and I had to pull it off because I forgot to put the chain slider in. So my gasket is already in place, but it's on the stator, the cover side. So you can see there's 2 dowel pins. We've got a new gasket, and the manual does call for a little bit of sealant right behind this rubber grommet. So I've already put the sealant on there. That's why I don't want to pull it off and do it again. And typically I would put the dowels in the case side first, but since, like I said, I already had it on there and it pulled off this way, I'm going to put it back on the same way. Oh man, that lined up perfectly. So you just want to make sure those dowels go in place nicely. Now I'll slide all of our case bolts in. These do have just a little bit of blue Loctite on them as the manual calls for. And as you're putting these in, you just want to make sure that your gasket is lined up properly. Sometimes you have to push it into place. Otherwise you'll pinch it and you'll probably have a leak. And we'll just run these in place. Go in a crisscross pattern. And I'm going to tighten these down to 9 foot-pounds. All right, now we got our torque limiter gear. You can see I've already lubed it up. That will go in place now. And then we've got our torque limiter gear cover. This has a new O-ring on it, and I did put a little bit of dielectric grease on there. And when you put this on, you want to take your time and just kind of ease it in place so that you don't shear off the O-ring, because that will probably result in leaks if you do shear it off. Same thing with these. I got a little bit of blue Loctite on them. And again, we're going to 9 foot-pounds. All right, so we are moving away from the bottom end, and we're going to get started with the top end. We've got a brand new Wiseco piston here. I want to stop and give BP Racing ATV a huge shout out. They hooked us up with this 13.4-to-1 high compression piston. They also hooked us up with a brand new factory bore Athena cylinder that's got larger water jackets. That's going to help keep us cooler. It's going to refresh the power, so we'll be running on basically a brand new motor. And they also hooked us up with a Stage 3 hot cams kit, and all of the gaskets are also on the house from BP Racing. If you guys are interested in getting parts for your quad or side-by-side, definitely hit up BP Racing ATV. They've got parts for pretty much any machine you can think of. They've got awesome packages. They've got things that you can assemble yourself, and they also do motor rebuilds if you want to send them your stuff. Awesome guys, definitely check them out. And if you guys want 10% off, use promo code SABO10 and you will get 10% off your entire order. All right, so let's open this bad boy up. You guys know I love brand new pistons. It's like jewelry for guys. These things are awesome. So we've got our rings in here. This is a standard 96mm bore. Oh yeah. She's pretty. And look at that nice big arrow. So you know which way it goes, because I'm telling you what, I get DMs on the regular. People don't know what's wrong with their top end. They send me pictures and the piston is backwards. People do it. So let's set this thing up. We'll put the rings in here. All right, guys, first thing I want to do is check our ring gap on our main rings. So what we're going to do is orient these with the print on top. Not that that really matters for checking ring gap, but we'll place that in the cylinder. And then we'll use the piston to make it nice and flush. Now, generally, you want about 4 thousandths. There's the gap right there. You want about 4 thousandths per inch of bore. We have a 3.75 inch bore approximately. So I would say we need about 14 to 16 thousandths, I would say, would be sufficient. It looks like it's super tight, so we're probably going to have to file this out a little bit. We'll start with 14 thousandths. See what we have. Yeah, man, that's tight. 14 thousandths doesn't even fit in there. Let's see what it is. Whew. Man, 12 you might be able to stuff in there. So we're probably between 10 and 12 thousandths. Let's file a little bit out of that one. Now in the manual for Wiseco, they tell you to only do one side. And they want you to go from the outside to the inside, if I understand it correctly. And I'm just using a little file here. They do have special tools for this. You do want to take note. You want to try to keep these square. So you don't want to go on an angle or anything like that. So I'm just going to kind of work this little by little until we get to the required amount of ring gap. All right, you can see the gap is a little bit bigger. I want to go slow with this because you can take more off, but you can't add material. All right, well now it's just barely 12 thousandths, so we got a little bit more to go. All right, a little bit more filing, and we are good to go at 14 thousandths according to the manual that is in spec. So I'm going to go ahead and check our other rings, and then we'll put them all in orientation on the piston and get that in place. All right, all our rings are set up. The top and second main ring actually both needed a little bit of material taken out. Now, before I even put the rings on here, I like to put one of my C-clips in. Now, you want to make sure the gap is not near the opening, and you want to make sure it's either at 6 o'clock or 12 o'clock. That's just kind of a rule of thumb. But the biggest thing that you really, though, is you want to keep it away from the little opening here. So we'll see if we can push this thing in place. These things can be a pain in the ass. Wiseco is usually not too bad. That one kind of went right in there. And you just want to make sure that it's seated in the groove. Now for the rings, I'm going to go by the Wiseco instructions here. They lay it out pretty nicely here. All right, so the first thing we're going to put on are the oil expander. Now when you put this in place, you want it facing this way, with the end portion facing upward, so that they butt together like so. And that's going to go to the bottom. And then you have the two oil expander rings. These can go in any orientation, up or down. There's one for the top and one for the bottom. Once we get them on there, we can change the orientation and get them in there correctly. Now I'll put the piston second ring in place. I'm going to make sure that the print is facing upwards. And just take your time with this. You don't want to scratch up your piston. Then the top ring, same thing. You want the print on the top. All right, so the rings are in the grooves, and now we will put the piston on to the crank, and then we can orient them, because we're going to be playing with the piston and stuff. There's no point in getting them oriented correctly now, because you're probably going to move them around. All right, now we're going to throw our piston in. I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube in here. You want to make sure your arrow is facing forward. You'd be surprised how many people, like I said, they put them in backwards. So we're just going to slide our piston in, our pin. All right, now we're going to put our piston clip in. I'm going to take a rag and just fill the area around the piston. This way, if we drop that clip in there, it will be at least not way down in the crankcase. We'll be able to save it. Otherwise, that can be a freaking nightmare. And again, we're going to put the opening of the clip at 6 or 12, so top or bottom. That's just going to further ensure that the piston clip does not come out. All right, now I'm going to throw a new gasket on, or base gasket. I'm not going to use any sealer on this. Put a little bit of anti-seize on our dowel pins. And you have two dowel pins that go both on the left side. And now I'm going to line up my rings. You can see in the manual here, they do show you where the openings go. You can use that, or like I said before, Wiseco does come with instructions as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and orient those. I'm not gonna do an instruction thing on that because it's gonna be kind of hard to tell, but it's right there in the manual. It's pretty easy to do. You're just essentially lining up the gaps of all your rings in the correct spots. But in short, the top ring, we're gonna have the opening towards the exhaust side. The second ring down, the opening is on the intake side. And then for the oil expander, the top ring is on the exit side or exhaust side, and the bottom one is again on the intake. And the oil ring expander, which is the wavy washer in between, according to the Kawasaki manual, that is arbitrary, so that can kind of be wherever you like. Before we do anything, I'm gonna take just a little bit of my motor oil, whatever kind of motor oil you're using, and you wanna kind of keep it the same. I'm using Klotz MX4, and we're just gonna coat the cylinder so that we don't have a dry first start. All right, now that we have everything coated, we're gonna put our cylinder on. 4-strokes can be kind of a pain in the ass because you have to contend with the cam chain slider and the cam chain, but it's really not that difficult. So using your fingers or a ring compressor, you're gonna hold your rings and try to slide the cylinder in place. And as you get close to the bottom here, you just want to make sure you're not pinching your gasket anywhere. All right, now I've got my cam chain pulled to make sure there's no, it's not like, overlapping on itself or anything. We've got the back cam chain slide here. So we're gonna slide in the front cam chain slide. Now you can't just drop this thing in here, you know what I mean? It needs to be a certain orientation. You have a hook right here, and then you have another stay right here. And then this bottom portion has a groove that it fits into as well. I'm gonna show you into this channel here and kind of, oh, damn it. Well, that happens sometimes. But I'm gonna try to show you in here with a flashlight before I throw it in, just to give you an idea. All right, so if you look down in here, you can see right here is where one of the catches goes, and it's gonna be really hard to see, but all the way down in the bottom, there's a groove. And then of course you have this slot right here for the top stay. So you just wanna make sure that everything is in place. Shine a flashlight in there when you're all done, and that way you won't have any problems once everything's together. All right, now we're gonna put our head on. I did surface this, cleaned it up. This thing is ready to rock and roll, and these will go in opposite corners. Now we'll put a new head gasket on. Can't really mess it up as long as you have it lined up with all the grooves. And then you can use those dowel pins to get it in place. All right, now we're gonna get the cylinder head in place. And I like to have a screwdriver handy because we're gonna use that to hold this cam chain in place once we get to the top. If it falls in the engine, it's not that big of a deal. You just gotta fish it out. And just like with the cylinder, just take your time with this. Make sure everything's lined up right. I think we're lined up. And then I'll just take the screwdriver, throw it through there for now, just so that we don't lose our cam chain. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and put our head studs in. The manual does recommend that you put new washers on here, and they want you to put a little bit of molybdenum grease on both sides of the washers. You have longer ones and you have shorter ones. The longer ones go on the inside and the shorter ones go on the outside. I'll show you how that works in a second here. I'm also putting a little bit of anti-seize on the threads of these studs. So this is a longer one. Just drop that in place. And then these shorter ones go out here. Now we'll thread these in with the impact going across, crisscross pattern. And these get tightened down to 44 foot-pounds, so you don't have to be gentle with these. All right, let's see if we can tighten these down to 44 foot-pounds. Might be a little difficult because we don't have like the motor in a jig or anything, but I should be able to get it done using the old swing arm bolt method. Tighten these in a crisscross pattern. Okay. And we'll just go over, double check them. All right, now we've got 3 bolts that go here. You can see I was using a zip tie to hold our cam chain. So we're gonna go back to the screwdriver method for a second here so we can get these bolts in. And I am putting a little anti-seize on these. You've got 2 with a little collar, they go up top. And then 1 without a collar that goes in the bottom. And I'm going to tighten these down to 10 foot-pounds. All right, now before we do the cams, we're going to remove these inspection windows so that we can time the motor properly. I'm going to use a nickel and a pair of pliers.
Now before we drop our cams in, we're going to get our piston to top dead center. We're going to use those little access windows that we just opened up using a 17mm wrench, and we're going to roll in a counterclockwise direction until the hash mark on the flywheel lines up with the hash mark on the case. So here is our exhaust camshaft. You can see the auto decompression system right here. It's comprised of these weights, and you'll notice that they spring outwards with centrifugal force, and you can see right here the decompression lever actuating. So these hash marks will be faced towards the outside of the engine and lined up with the case right here. Before we put the cams in, we're going to put some assembly lube in all of our cam journals. One last thing before we drop the cam in, we're going to put our shims in and our shim buckets. I like to put assembly lube on all this stuff as well. All right, now while holding the cam chain up, we're going to drop our exhaust camshaft in first. And while you're dropping these in, you want to try to get that hash on the cam at least close to where it needs to be, but you can adjust it if it's not perfect. Now on the intake cam, you can see instead of a hash, there's a punch mark, and that's going to line up on the edge of the case right here, just like on the opposite side. Now we're going to put this cam in the same fashion. This one might be a little bit tricky because at this point, you're going to start to lose a little bit of slack in your chain. Just take your time and you'll get it in place.
Now that we've got our cams in there, I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube pretty much on everything. Now we'll put these little positioning rings in place, kind of like half moons. There's a little groove on top of each of the bearings for these things. Now we've got 4 dowel pins here, just like all the other dowel pins on this project. I like to put a little bit of assembly lube on these. It's just going to make it easier for the next time this thing has to come apart so that these things don't seize. Got 4 of them that go up here. Now we're going to put our camshaft caps in place. So then we have these 2 little oil pipes, and these are going to go in between here and here, right between both of our caps. You're supposed to put a little bit of grease on these before you install them. So we're going to put grease on this, put these in the holes, and then kind of float these together on top of the cams all at one time. Push these together like so. And then this should fall right in place. Now I've got 8 bolts that are going to go on top. I've got these darker bolts. These go in the center. And then we've got the regular silver bolts. These go on the outside, and I do have anti-seize on all of these. These are going to get tightened down to 9 foot-pounds. You want to go in a pattern that's crisscross, that starts in the center, and work your way outward. All right, now I've already adjusted my valve shims. So basically how you would do that is get your cams in the correct locations. That is basically at top dead center, lining all your marks up. That's all in the manual as well. And then you would take a feeler gauge and just slide it under your cam lobes and make sure that they're within spec of the manual. If they're not, you'd have to adjust out the little shims that are under your shim buckets. Luckily, DBC Racing hooked us up with a shim kit, so all of our shims are good to go and we're in spec. All right, now making sure we're at top dead center, you can see our hash is lined up with the marking on the case up on the flywheel. You just want to turn the engine counterclockwise to get to that position. Now we can adjust our cams. Now I've already got my motor timed correctly, but I figure I will show you where the cams need to be so that you can get yours timed correctly. So you can see the little hash mark on the exhaust cam. That's going to be flush with your head right here. And then over here, you have a little punch mark that's going to be just above your head right here. And the other thing you want to inspect is that you have right above your hash mark, starting with the pin right here. We want to start right here. We want the 29th pin to be right on that the punch mark. So I'm actually going to walk through with you just to show you exactly how to do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. So we're good to go. That's how you check that. Easy. All right, now we're going to put our cam chain tensioner in. So it's going to go right here. I've got this all cleaned up, and we have the end cap bolt is removed, and you can see there's a little slot in there. What you want to do is get a screwdriver in there and put some pressure on the plunger, and as you tighten clockwise, it'll bring that in. And they do have tools that will hold that in, but you can't let go, because as soon as you let go, you see it will go back to putting tension on the cam chain. So we're going to hold it like so, and I can do it like this. I just hold it like so. They do make tools, like I said, that will slip in there. There's little grooves that'll hold it, but we'll be all right without that. Put a new gasket on here, and then we'll put this in place. All right, now you can let that tensioner out. You see it put tension on the chain up there. Now we can tighten these two bolts to 9 foot-pounds. Now we're going to put a new O-ring in here and our end cap bolt. We're going to go to 8 foot-pounds on this one. All right, now at this point, I'm going to throw a ratchet on the end of the crankshaft, and we're going to turn in a counterclockwise orientation. We just want to make sure that nothing's binding up. We don't have any valves hitting the piston or anything like that. So we'll just roll it over. Should have nice and smooth action. Everything feels good to me. And now while we're at it, I'm just going to go ahead and double check the timing. So I'll get our cam markings in place. And we'll make sure that the hash lines up. It looks like we're good to go. All right, now that our timing is good to go, we can put these inspection windows back in. All right, now we can finally put on our cam cover. I've got our rubber gasket in place. I did put a little bit of Bond just in this area, as the manual recommends. Of course, they tell you to use Kawasaki Bond. And I've put a little bit of assembly lube up here on the cam chain slider, and I've also put a little bit of assembly lube in this spark plug gasket just to help with sealing a little bit. So I'm going to put this in place. You've got these shoulder bolts that go up here, and there are 3 of them. Unfortunately, I've only got 2 because that one, I guess somebody had snapped it off. So I'm going to have to order that one, but for now we can put these in place, let the Bond dry, and the motor will basically be done for purposes of this video. And they do have these little rubber washers, and you can see there is a steel portion. The steel portion faces up, so it will face like so, and that's going to seal that cam cover so we don't get any leaks. So I'm just going to put one in the front and one in the back for now. For now, I'm just going to snug these. All right, now there's a couple last things I want to do before we call this done. I'm going to thread the thermostat in. That goes right in the back of the cylinder. Got a little bit of Teflon tape on there. We don't want any leaks. I'm just going to snug that. And the last thing I'm going to do is put on this intake boot. You can see it says throttle side. That faces outwards. It is indexed. You can see it's got the little stay right here that lines up with the tab right here, and that's going to make sure we have everything in the correct orientation. So I'm just going to pop this in place. I'll snug down our one clamp in the back.
Okay guys, so that will complete the motor build. If you're having trouble with any of the steps in your motor build, remember to take your time, and if you're getting frustrated, take a break and come back to it. Thank you for watching the video, and if this helped you in any way, shape, or form, please give me a thumbs up and comment below. Let me know what you think of the video and how I could make these even better in the future. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.